Okay, everyone, this is a brief look at Luke chapter 1, specifically regarding John the Baptist's parents, Zechariah and Elizabeth. So in my daily reading time, I've just begun Luke chapter 1 in the New Testament, and today this kind of stood out that specifically spoke to my situation, and I believe will be an encouragement to you as well. Luke 1, chapter 5, in the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah, which was the 8th division. So the Levitical priests served 2 weeks a year. They served twice a year in 1 week increments. And there was essentially 24 divisions served twice. So in this particular case, I think they can rewind the clock, and they know that I think that he was serving sometime in September, October timeframe. Both of them were upright in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and regulations blamelessly. Not perfectly, but they were upright, they loved God, they feared the Lord, and they were living to the best of their ability to be pleasing to God. Verse 7 says, "But they had no children because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well along in years." Now, I attempted to do some research on this phrase, well along in years, and there is no particular age that's identified with that phrase. It can mean, essentially what it means is that she was past childbearing years, past a childbearing age. Now, what's significant with Elizabeth is that, as we see in verse 25, when she actually is able to have a baby, she says, "The Lord has taken away my disgrace." So barrenness was viewed as a curse. It was viewed as a disgrace. It was viewed as a shameful thing. And I am sure that for decades, Elizabeth wrestled with the Lord regarding why she could not have children, especially since she had so blamelessly followed the Lord and obeyed his commands. So these conditional promises of the Old Testament, if you obey me, then these blessings will take place. One of the blessings was you'll be fruitful and multiply. In this particular case, Elizabeth obeyed, but did not experience the promised blessings that God said would come with obedience. So I can imagine Elizabeth, just like perhaps an area or two in your life and in my life, wrestling with God and asking him why. This doesn't make any sense. I've lived to honor you. I've lived to please you. I've done the right thing. There are promises in your word, and yet I'm not experiencing what you've promised in your word. Why? And God seems to be silent. So the well advanced in years, I couldn't find a particular age on that, but I have a theory here in a moment. Let me go a little bit further. Verse 8. "Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense." Now, I saw one commentator said that this was a privileged position, and that priests could only be expected to serve in this capacity once in their Levitical career. So I don't know if those who had already served were therefore not part of the, were no longer part of the group of priests who would, when you were chosen by lot, as was the custom. So I don't know if he was excluded from that group once you had served in that capacity or what. But in this case, I mean, it was a pretty rare occurrence, and was certainly the highlight of a priest's service at the temple area, which occurred 2 times a year for 2 weeks total in a year's time. So he goes in the temple to burn incense, the Holy of Holies, and when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were outside praying. Now, this was probably additional individuals, but at this time there may have been 50 other Levitical priests also serving, but not selected. So you've got those additional priests and Levites, and then you've got anyone else who's at the temple as well. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right hand of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to give him the name John. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth." It goes on to describe more about the calling of John, and in verse 18, Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." So we see the exact same phrase in verse 18 that we see in verse 7. So a little bit of background on the Levitical priesthood. In Numbers chapter 4 and in Numbers chapter 8 and in also 1 Chronicles chapter 23, we have age limits that are placed on the priesthood. So for military service, that began at the age of 20. But for the Levitical priesthood, originally in Numbers chapter 4, God set the terms to be between age 30 and age 50. And so in everything that I could find in the Old Testament, the maximum age of service was the age of 50. Now, people didn't live as long back then as they do today. I don't know what the average lifespan was, but I'm assuming it was a lot less than the typical 76 years of age here in America at this time. And so it is my theory that Zechariah was probably in his high 40s. Let's just say he's 48, which would be for Elizabeth a season of time. You know, her season of childbearing, let's say from 18 to 28 to 38 to 48. So she had been praying, she had been serving God, she had been seeking the Lord as a good, obedient Jewish follower for 30 years. And for 30 years, I'm assuming they were married young. They might have been the same age. She might have been a little bit younger. I don't know if this was the last year of Zechariah's service as a priest in this official capacity. He may have been, let's say, 50, turning 50 that year. Perhaps Elizabeth was a little bit younger. And but she was still generally 45 and beyond, is somewhat of the end of childbearing years. So in any case, I think they were in their elder 40s. I had typically always thought 50s, 60s, but if John the Baptist began his ministry at the age of 30 and his father was about 50, his father would have lived long enough, let's say, for John the Baptist to invest in John, his son, but he would have been about 80 years of age when John the Baptist began his public ministry. And we don't read or see of the parents at that time. So it is in all likelihood, they had passed away before John began his ministry around the age of 30. Regardless, it's very clear that Elizabeth spent decades praying to the Lord, waiting upon the Lord, perhaps receiving no answer whatsoever for all her faithfulness and obedience. Now it's a pretty difficult test in her life, an extended test. And it says in verse 13 that the angel says, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard. So not only had Elizabeth, we are assuming, lifted up her heart to the Lord, asking for children, but Zechariah had also been praying for a son to carry on the family name. And in all likelihood, that had been going on for decades as well. And then at the right time, the Lord shows up in a miraculous way and grants that request. So for me, this is really an encouragement. I don't know if there's anything in your life where you're praying, you're not hearing an answer. You've been praying perhaps for years. In this particular case, I think it's highly likely they could have been praying and requesting the favor of the Lord for about 30 years or more. And if there's anything in your life where you're praying and you're seeking the Lord, but he seems to be quiet, just so happens that the angel speaking to Zechariah here in Luke chapter 1 was the first time we read in 400 years that God miraculously spoke to a human. So between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there was a span of about 400 years, and we have no direct revelation from the Lord to any person that is recorded. This very well may have been the first time in 400 years. And God initiates with Zechariah. And so the true encouragement, I guess, the ultimate encouragement for me and for you may be, is God observing how long we will persist in faith to believe that he is good, to believe that he has a plan, to believe that he has the power any moment to answer a prayer request, but that his timing is incredibly important. And rather than give up hope, rather than have a heart that turns bitter against God, can we fully surrender to God's timing? Can we fully surrender to God's answer, whether it's a yes or a no, or it's a wait for 30 years? Can we joyfully surrender that answer to the Lord, whatever it may be? Can we continue to trust him in faith, regardless of what our circumstances look like and what the environment around us looks like? So truly a test of faith, but in this particular case, that prayer was in fact answered at the right time. And that kind of gives us all hope that if we persevere in our faith, God sees us, God's with us. He knows the difficulty. He knows how this trial is stretching and increasing our faith and our perseverance. And our responsibility is not the answer. Our responsibility is to maintain our integrity and our faithfulness to him and to continue to trust him no matter what. And that is what I got out of this passage here this morning in Luke chapter 1, and my reason for sharing it with you here today. Okay, God bless.